Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Two Wizards and a Mic, where a couple of old dudes sit down, talk about D&D, and hopefully provide you information that you could use to make your game awesomer. Awesomer? That's what I said. Hello, Andrew.
Hey Shane, how you doing?
Not too bad. As always, before we kick off our conversation, are there any updates from the Kickstarter?
There are. So the World of Mirror campaign books have arrived in Scotland,
Wow.
England, Netherlands, Lithuania,
Wow.
and they're starting to arrive in the US and Canada. I know that one came to a backer in Nova Scotia, and there's some books in the US that are arriving on the East Coast. So those are starting to arrive. Most of them should be arriving this month. Some of the larger orders will be later in the month. And I've almost finished ordering them all. There's probably about 30 to go, not too many to go. And then the other Kickstarter, the PDF is almost done, should be out this month. And then the printed books, hopefully next month.
Excellent. I'm waiting. Actually,
The one
I think
extra
I'm a
thing I should
book
add
behind.
quickly is that
Yeah.
there were 3 supplements that came with the Mirror World book.
Right.
And I said that they were going to sort of be booklets that help expand the world, give you a bit more information, but they're much larger than that. I'm just finishing the factions one. It should be done in the next couple of days. That one's going to get sent out. It's a PDF. It's 80 pages of factions from the world of Mirror. And then I'm going to send out a history booklet. That one probably will be more like a booklet. That one will probably be maybe 30 pages or something. And then the Inns and Taverns one, that one's going to be like 200, 300 pages or something of Inns and Taverns. So the factions one should be out in a couple of days. The history one and the inns one, hopefully by the end of the month.
Where can people get these? Like, are these going to be supplements that they can purchase? Are they going to be given out? What's the story there?
Good question. So for the Kickstarter, they are add-ons. So if you're interested, you can join the Kickstarter. I'll put both Kickstarter links below. You can still pre-order them. And the supplements are cheap. They're only 5 Canadian each. And as I said, they're probably a 300-page book, one that's about 30, 40 pages, and then one that's about 80. So they add quite a bit to Mirror. They give you a lot more information about, as I said, factions, the history, and the Inns and Taverns. And then we'll see. Maybe when it's released public, they might be options on drive-through. We haven't decided about that yet. At one point, it would be nice to format them for print. So we'll look at that later.
Very, very cool. I'm excited. I'm very pleased. But today we're talking about one of my favorite encounters I think my characters have had are witches and hags. Specifically, I think hags were, the predominant encounter for a couple of my characters, where one fell madly in love, and another one I think was hell bent on murdering them all. I think that was the case. But let's talk about those, because I've got the notes open too, and I'm kind of like, oh my god, there's so much to know here.
Sure. Yeah, we could go on and on for hours about them. Very fascinating. So we're not talking about hags in the sense of an old crone, that definition, which can be quite positive. We're talking about witches and hags in terms of monsters in the game of Dungeons and Dragons. These are archetypes in D&D. They're kind of used interchangeably a lot. And there are a lot of examples of famous witches and hags, and there are some witches that are good, but usually hag is meant to be evil. That's the true archetype. And here's some examples. So there's Baba Yaga in the folklore from Russia, which has been very closely tied to D&D for a long time. There's a great famous adventure in Dragon magazine from the early 80s about Baba Yaga, this witch who has a magical hut that has giant chicken legs that runs around the woods. And we have a version of Baba Yaga that I'll talk about later. There's the witch from Narnia, White Witch. There's Morgan Le Fay in the Arthurian legends, like, and in the Excalibur movie and story. There's Circe from the Odyssey. There's, of course, the good and evil witches in Wizard of Oz. That's very, very well known. The Witcher has witches, male and female. I believe there's male witches in there too. Usually, I should say witch is feminine, but not 100% of the time. And hag is always feminine. There's great witches in a series of books called His Dark Materials, British series. The first one I love. The other two are okay. It's a trilogy, and it's a TV show, which is actually pretty good. Parts of it are great. And they have really cool version of witches. Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, examples of witches. Harry Potter, of course, mostly good witches. Practical Magic, a really cool movie with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock, which is I love that movie about witches.
I know of it. I've never seen it.
It's actually surprisingly good, I think. There's Witches of Eastwick. There's Bewitched, the famous TV show, which is more light-hearted look at witches. The Sea Witch and Little Mermaid. In Buffy, her friend Willow becomes a witch. Spoiler alert. Nanny McVie is basically a good witch. And there are tons of examples. There's a lot of corny, like cheesy examples, but I think those are some of the better ones. So witches practice witchcraft, a kind of magic, or hag. These are similar. They're usually ugly. They can be good, as I mentioned. Most are thoroughly evil. They're similar to wizards in that they often have spell books and familiars. They have broomsticks and cauldrons. Now, witch hunts in history were horrible events that happened in Europe and even in North America as well. And there is still belief of witchcraft being practiced. And in Africa, and including where I'm from, it's still to this day, there's beliefs about it. And there's also people who actually practice witchcraft called Wiccans, so there's some real life examples, some from the game. Hags more specifically spread misery and hate beautiful things and virtue. They often have minions and they can come in and out of settlements by disguising themselves. In the 5th edition, the Coven rules, if there's 3 hags, they get special powers. They can share magic slots if they're close enough. I'd actually expand it. It's supposed to be 30 feet, but I'd expand it and make it more challenging so that they don't have to be right next to each other. There's a really great section in Volo's guide about hags. The front of that book has a cool section on a few monsters. The bestiary part is not that great, but the part about the creatures, there's one about, articles about hags and giants and mind flayers. Those are really cool. And here's the alternate cover. And I love some of the things they have in there. So they have examples of basically the personality of what these witches and hags could be like. And they also have examples of the kind of minions they could have, or the kind of devices they use, the mounts they have, and even vehicles. There's one example of a hag or a witch who could fly around in a giant skull.
That is very cool.
Yeah. And they also have names, which I really like, which I think are quite well done. So some examples, they could have titles like Auntie, Granny, these sort of things. And then, these are kind of typical names like Agatha, Agnes, Matilda, Ursula, of course, Olga. Like some of these names are just, they're perfect. And then they have examples of the kind of treasure and the kind of special artifacts they would have. And they give you special lair actions that you could have if you have a coven of witches or hags, which and I think it's pretty useful. They're a great villain. I think they're one of the best villains in D&D. They're up there with like vampires and like rakshasas and beholders. Like they're just a great villain because you can build a whole campaign around it. They're
Nice.
smart, right? So they're super challenging. You wouldn't want to have a hag face a party right away at first level. You'd want that to be later because you probably take them out. They're arrogant. They have this horrible mechanic in D&D where they eat babies. So they'll steal a baby, consume the baby, and then give birth to their own baby and either raise that child themselves, which will then become a hag once they're 13, or they'll switch the babies, send their hag baby back to the family, keep the human baby, and usually get rid of it. And then once their daughter's old enough, when she's 13, then she'll come and reclaim her again. Yeah.
They are. That amount of detail for a particular creature within D&D is kind of epic because you don't get that level with most creatures. Actually, to be honest,
It's
because
true. Yeah, it's true, and everything about hags and witches is like that. There's just so much depth,
it's fascinating because you've got. I mean, there's a lot of creatures out there that are pretty archetypical sort of stuff that but these ones have such history, like vampires and things like that, where you go back in time in forever, and you will find in written history that there are these fears of these different creatures existing. Like in your notes, you were talking about witch hunts and Salem trials and things like that, where witches were very much feared. But of course, every time I think of witches and hags, I always think of that Monty Python skit of if she's a witch, what do we do? Burn her, burn them.
Oh yeah.
That kind of thing. But
Yeah,
again,
well,
that comes from all that history.
yeah, well, that's one reason they're such a great villain is because they're horrible and easy to hate and easy to motivate your party to deal with, like vampires. In the monster manual, there's 3 basic hags / witches. The green hag, which is sort of more wilderness, where swamps and moors, and they're a fey creature. They're into manipulating people, creating tragedy. They have a really powerful effect where they can turn invisible whenever they want and just vanish with no trace. Unless you want to
I've
track
never
them
had that
target.
experience with them before.
I would never
No.
do that to you, Shane. And you guys had a really hard time with that. It was weeks and weeks and weeks of figuring out how we're going to deal with this enemy who could just disappear. She has an illusory appearance too, where she can make herself look like a humanoid of her size, and she can mimic. So she can sound like and look like pretty much anybody. The night hag is a fiend, so like a demon or devil. They can enter people's nightmares. They have a lot more spells. They can actually go into another dimension, basically, to hide, to escape. And yeah, they're the highest level hag in the monster manual. They have a lot of hit points, high armor class. The sea hag, so obviously near water bodies, islands. They hate beauty. They have a death glare, which again is deadly for especially low level. They can also change their appearance, and they also are so ugly that you actually take damage from seeing them. So that's our core group. In our books, like in the Monsters of Feyland, we added 3 more. We added the actual witch, a powerful version, which can be evil or good. It's actually inspired by the Hansel and Gretel movie, which I love the witches in that movie. They move super fast. They're good fighters, hand-to-hand combat. So I give them uncanny dodge that rogues have. They always have a broom of flying. I also give them water susceptibility because I love that feature in The Wizard of Oz. So if they get damaged by water, they take some damage. If it was a lot of water, it could be a severe problem for them. There's also the Frog Witch, one of our more famous creatures that we made, one of more
my
popular.
favorite witch so far.
So she's quite funny. She has a giant frog mount. There's a more powerful version of her in Feyland 2, and has lots of minions like frogs and reptiles. And there's the Forest Hag, which is all to do with decomposing and sort of the dark side of the wilderness. In Feyland 2, as I mentioned, we have a more powerful version of the Frog Witch, and we have the Witch Queen, which is a super powerful witch as well. In the Underworld book, we have the Hag Queen. So if you thought hags were nasty, this one is even worse because her hit points are off the chart. High armor class, more spells, have fun. I also gave her a crown, which enables her to see anything invisible or the true form of anything shape changed.
Oh my lord!
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, that's awesome. I see a future adventure with a big villain at the end.
Could be. In Monsters of the Wilderness, we have Baba Yaga in her hut, which I mentioned, a famous witch from Russia. She's known for having just this massive amount of knowledge, so people will actually go out and seek her, including adventurers. But making any kind of bargain with a hag or a witch is a dangerous idea, and that includes her. We also include her hut in the book as a construct, and it's this hut that has these giant chicken legs that can run around rapidly across the terrain or through the wilderness. But if you go inside it, it is enormous. It has multiple levels and floors. It has like wilderness interiors. It's really cool. We have the Witch of the Nine in the Wilderness book. That's a famous group of witches from folklore. There's also the Crocodile Queen, which is another swamp kind of witch, but this time all focused around crocodiles and sort of inspired by some of those Disney movies with swamp creatures and swamp witches.
Right.
And alligators and crocodiles. And I love that sort of idea. And Travis has one hilarious image of her. She's basically dressed up like a crocodile. In our last book, we made the Gray Hag, which can literally open her mouth so big that she can just walk up and swallow somebody.
That's terrifying.
For some reason, I love that idea. And she not only uses her broom of flying outdoors, but she uses it indoors. So I thought that would be cool of her like flying through dungeons and castles and
well, I could totally see a party being like bowled over, like, pins at a bowling alley.
That's a good point. Yeah. And that's actually the image in the book is her flying through a dungeon with her mouth wide open, like, flying along. Then the last one is, and you can tell we have quite a few, is the Nag Hag, who most people might recognize. So one of her features is this nag power that does psychic damage.
I know. I think we've run into the Nag Hag, or at least a prototype of the Nag Hag ages ago.
Yeah, a lot of people.
I remember we had an adventure where we were getting messages in our head, that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people run into them. Even on the Big Island of Vancouver Island, sometimes they run into them. Even in Victoria, sometimes. Yeah, they seem to be around, you know. It's as if these stories are sort of representing archetypes in our world.
Funny that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know why people find it, like you said, the hags and the witches are great villains. They're just, you just want so badly to defeat them, and I love that. Like seriously, as a DM, my favorite thing is to see a really powerful villain, a horrible villain,
Yeah.
defeated by the party. I love it. Like I am not an anti. I make the world difficult, as you know, as you've
Yeah,
lost
yeah.
several PCs, but I'm definitely on the side of the players, and I want them to like, you know, cleanse the earth of these creatures for sure.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is that if you don't have, I mean, every, party heroes, whatever you want to call them, um, the only way that they actually feel rewarded is that they've actually done something worthwhile. And the thing that I like about your games is that, um, if it's appropriate to the adventure, we might actually see the outcome of a previous adventure where it's like, oh yes, there was a character or an NPC here that's no longer here, but they have this story, this history that they've had, and especially with like the best villains. Think of any film, think of any book, think of anything you've ever read about the ones that you come away completely satisfied, where you're like, "Oh, that was really good." It's always because there's been a decent villain that you love to hate. That you're like, "Oh my goodness, this is the worst individual ever, creature, whatever it might be." In this case, a hag, and the hags that we had trouble with in those about 2 or 3 adventures ago. Um, were actually very satisfying to vanquish because, uh, as you said, it was weeks and weeks and weeks of us trying to figure this adventure out, and every time we got that close, poof, they were gone, and none of the characters in that particular party had any real idea of how to combat that one feature, and now there's been plenty of ideas, but still,
Right.
uh, it made for a great adventure because it wasn't just the one big bad. It was actually like several.
Yeah.
And, we had to go to different locations to find them. And actually, I think there were some times where they just showed up. We were actually not anywhere where we thought they would be. And
Yeah.
then suddenly, I'm being thrown out
Yeah.
of a window. So,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what happened is that you went to a village to find out there were some problems that the village leader wanted you to look into. You eventually found out the culprit was a hag, but she kept disappearing every time you found her because she could look like anybody in the village, and including your party and including the leader of the village. And then you learned, oh, there's three of them. Great.
exactly. It's like this problem was that big, and now it's this big. Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah,
was a huge. It was a great villain. I mean, you're right. These are quintessential. Every culture on the planet, I think, has that sort of hag witch character
100%. Yeah.
in folklore. Yeah,
And you're so right. Like, it's really, a storyteller does a good job if you immediately, like, if it happens soon where you realize, oh, I've got to defeat this. Like, the first thing that actually comes to mind for me is actually Star Wars, Episode 4, the original first movie. When you saw Darth Vader come onto that ship at the beginning,
yeah.
you were like, they're thoroughly evil. That's what he obviously stands for. His men are just slaughtering all these people, and they're very powerful. And at first, you see that he's up against a princess in robes with one little laser gun and two robots, and you're like, this is going to be a long fight. And then when she is captured immediately and the robots flee, you're like, this is going to be one epic story because we are not close to being able to deal with this monster. Um, and of course,
And
it's not the person that you are fighting. That person ends up being saved, but the monster that has overcome him, um, which is similar to these hags and witches and vampires, where this is an evil creature. Yeah, it's so, like I said, it's so satisfying as a DM, and I know as a player because I've been a player to defeat a villain like that, it's like you say, watching a movie about it or reading about it. It only works if they're a real threat, and
Yeah.
if there's some layers to them as well, right?
And it's also, I mean, that kind of leads it into the point that you've got on our notes here, but about the debate surrounding witches, warlocks, druids as player characters or NPCs and things like that. Um, what is kind of your thought on that to start it off?
Sure. So my note there really is about there was in the Dragon magazine, again, you can tell this is something I loved getting in the 80s. There was very few ties to the game and to the community back then. There was no internet. If you're in a smaller city, I was in a smaller city at that point, unfortunately. There weren't as many players and gaming stores to talk about things. So this magazine was like your lifeline to the game and to the people who
Yeah.
were making it. So I'm pretty sure there was a witch class that was. I'll look it up for our next podcast, but there was, I'm pretty sure, a witch class that came out in the magazine one time as an option for people to use. So there's a debate these days. If you're going to play a witch, what would you make it? Would it be a wizard? Would it be a druid? Would it be a warlock? It's not really a sorcerer. They don't really get their magic just from the universe. There are some similarities to wizards because they use a spell book, but they don't really study or train like a wizard does. But they have a familiar often, like some sort of animal or fiendish or fey helper. That's like a wizard. But a druid, they're quite like druids too, because they're usually quite close to the earth and beasts, and shape changing. And then a warlocks, some witches have pacts with, fiends or fey creatures. I think the warlock class is one of the weak points of 5e. I don't really think it's that great personally. I think there's not enough magic and enough spells. You usually, like 60, 70% of the time, you're casting Eldritch Blast. I don't know if that's the greatest fit. For me, I would say I think a wizard, female version of a wizard, or a druid, those kind of fit more of what it could be. But I think it's really like if a player wanted to do that, if a player came to me and said, do you mind if I play a witch? And I'm going to use one of these classes, whatever fit their play style, I would be into it for sure.
Well, I mean, it's definitely I mean, you're right about the whole warlock thing because you and I have had this conversation before, or a little bit here and there. And not to mention at the table, we've talked about how that kind of weird class, not weird, the stuff that goes around that it's happened to it in so many ways over time has been strange because it's kind of like they wanted to get rid of it at some point. And haven't they done that in their new latest edition? Aren't they trying to get rid of witches things?
I'm not sure. I think it's still there. It's in the game. It's sort of been in and out. It wasn't around in the beginning. I think one of the issues with it is that, again, evil player characters usually are game breaking. I think it takes a lot of creativity to play. I don't think it works in the game, and I think to play a warlock, I know you've done it, and there've been people in in our group to do it. I think it takes a lot of creativity to do it well. I think the whole relationship with the patron is challenging. It's definitely a lot of work for the DM because, if you want to really add more depth to it, you really want to have a lot of understanding of what's going on there with a warlock and its patron, or his or her patron.
Yeah, I think I played a warlock once, but that warlock died early on.
Oh yeah, that's true.
It was
A
so I didn't
weasel.
really get into the thing
Yeah,
just because I mean that was like second, third session. I can't remember. It was pretty early.
it was probably. Oh, did he get killed by? No, he died in the swamp with the giant crocodile. Right?
I
Yeah,
think so. Yeah, it
that
was a
was our
while. Yeah,
double
it was.
ones. That's when you and
Yeah.
the other player,
Oh, that's right. You're right. You're right. The
you
double
rolled your
one.
death save. You both rolled one.
Right.
That came around to your turn. The rest of the party couldn't get to you, and you both rolled ones again. And that
Yeah,
is the
yeah, that's
loudest
right.
explosion of noise at our table we ever had. I still have the audio, and I have photos of that. That was
Yeah,
ridiculous.
it was. I was so. I That has never happened to me before ever. I hope it never happens
Or
again. But
since,
I
yeah.
gotta say, at the same time, though, it was incredibly cool because the amount of everything to fall into place where that just could sequentially happen each time with separate dice. It wasn't like it was the same dice or something weird
Well,
like that.
and
It was
when you
amazing.
both rolled ones, it came around the table, and then the next player, the other player whose character was in peril, looked at me, and I knew they were rolling a one, and they knew. We just looked at each other, and they rolled a one. And then we both looked at each other and looked at you, and we both felt Shane's rolling a one too, and we were right. Oh, that was something.
Oh man, that was an amazing moment, and that's hey, and I'm gonna throw this out there because this is always what we're about here. Is that what makes a really cool moment at a table where you can have that experience as a group, and it's not a bad thing because there's some people that their character dies, they get a lot of bent out of shape about it,
Yeah.
but that was kind of fun. Like it was like because you just never know what's going to happen, and that changed the entire dynamic of that game going forward because of
Oh,
that adventure because it was just such a
100%.
it was a
Half the
huge
party's
blow
gone.
early on. Like
Yeah.
we were like third level or maybe
Yeah.
fourth level,
Yeah, probably third
pretty early.
level. Yeah, I would think third because you went to the haunted mansion, then you came back to the village, then you went back to go investigate the lizard men, and then you were in the swamp. So probably third level, and then half the party's gone in a few seconds.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Um, yeah, but sometimes the dice, that's the game. Sometimes the dice do that, and you definitely feel sad whenever I feel sad when a player's character died that I'm not even playing. So, um, I know I did that once. I rolled a one once in 5e. I haven't played that much. I probably played maybe 20 times, and I had one character die first session, first level. I took out the big bad evil guy, but then one of their minions got me, and because I rolled a one. Um, so yeah, it happens. Roll a new character. Feel sad.
And that's an adage to live by. Is it roll a new character, roll a bunch of characters, play one you think is gonna be really cool, but be prepared that the
Yeah.
next character,
Well, it's
have
always
an idea of who they are because they could
right.
enter the fray at any time.
Well, it's cool because making characters. A lot of people have fun doing that. I do. So it's good to have extra characters. The other thing was I immortalized that character by making them an NPC in one of the monster books, so they live forever now. Even though they only lasted one session, now they're in what book are they in? They're in the Monsters of the City book.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. So, is there any final things you'd like to say about the Kickstarter, about the debate of the warlock versus the witch, or
Yeah, I think that's just really up to the person, the style. I mean, there's lots of different ways to play and lots of different tables. Um, I think it's more like I said, a wizard or a druid, less like a warlock. Um, but they're great villains. Really cool thing to base your campaign around. I would, you know, looking at that section in Volos is useful. I don't know if I'd buy the whole book if I knew what it was like, but that part of the book is really cool. And yeah, and then the only other update I would say is we're getting ready for the next adventure, which should kickstart probably early November, and that's what I'm writing right now. That one, and then those mirror supplements.
I'm looking forward to the supplements because I like that stuff that you just get, and the fact that it's going to be so long. I mean,
Yeah, well, I had a lot of
it's
fun
bound
with
to.
the factions because at first I was like, well, I'll put the knighthoods in there, and the monk brotherhoods, and the bandit clans, and the like orc and goblin clans, and think and the thieves guild and things like that. But then I thought, because I actually have a list of NPCs that I kept, which was published partly published. So what I've done is actually I've also included notable families. So for each continent,
Oh,
you
okay.
get all these different groups, factions, guilds, but then you also get families. So I thought that would be interesting. And that was fun because I was like, I'll add in a grandmother here and a nephew here. And I have some where the whole family is like lawful good, but the young daughter is chaotic evil. Um, and then I have families headed by women, families headed by men. I have somewhere the men and women are equally leading their family. Somewhere it's more patriarchal. So I played with a lot of things like that. That I think you have a lot of cool choices for NPCs to use.
By the way, I did find a copy of Dragon Magazine where the witch returns. Um, I just want to point out that that magazine came out in 1986. So just shows you a few things about how much we love this game and like to talk about it. So and all these years later.
Yeah,
So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for listening. And of course, all of the links and all of the stuff that we've been talking about will be down below. And support your local publisher. Small publishers need love because we'll talk about the drama going on at Wizards of the Coast, but just not today. There's been too much. We're still raw from last year, so. But again, we appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
later.